Inside a building where people are dedicated to healing and saving lives, Sherry Crandell ended up losing her life. The murder of Sherry Crandell was so surprising, so surreal, the detective tapped to lead the investigation initially didn't believe it. Detective Bernie Nelson and the victim's family had the same reaction. How could she have been murdered inside the hospital? The victim's daughter, Tiffany Crandell, had just graduated from Penn State and was visiting friends when she got the news.
I screamed and I dropped the phone. I fell on the floor.
She says the drive home was excruciating.
Lots of tissues.
Thinking along the way.
It was just so hard being 3.5 hours away and just wanting to be there, just wanting to see her.
Sherry Crandell was a registered nurse, and in the 4 years before her death, worked as an administrator in the family practice clinic at Prince George's Hospital. She had just turned 50 years old. Dedicated to her job, Sherry would sometimes stay late. One of those nights was the evening of January 13, 1998. It was around 8:30, and Sherry was finishing some paperwork in a somewhat secluded section of the hospital when she was attacked. She was bound, raped, strangled.
That was just my first reaction, just how? How could this happen and they don't know what happened? I mean, unfortunately, there were no cameras that caught anything. There were no panic buttons. There were, it was sometimes hard to get a hold of the security in the hospital or have them come right away.
In fact, Sherry wasn't found until 9:15, 45 minutes later, when a cleaning lady called security. Plenty of time for the killer to get away.
We do believe that she may have interrupted a theft in progress, and he was an opportunistic and decided to also commit a sexual assault.
Prince George's County Police Detective Bernie Nelson has been investigating the case since day one.
It appears that he was in there for a while. In order to tie her up the way that he did, and also to partially remove some of her clothing, and that there were signs of a sexual assault. We know that he was in there, I would estimate approximately 15 to 20 minutes.
The office was ransacked, and police believe the killer was after the money in a fundraiser candy box and any other cash he could find. The restraints the killer used were items he found in the office. Investigators recovered some fingerprints, but they haven't been able to match them yet. In the years prior to the murder, there was a history of petty theft all over the hospital, and Sherry Crandell was fed up with it. On December 23, 1997, 3 weeks before she was murdered in an office right up there, she wrote a note, an email to the head of security, complaining about the lack of response to a suspicious person. Sherry Crandell was upset and wanted answers. A man was trying to steal a TV from the waiting room, and despite a call for help, it took security 30 minutes to arrive. Sherry wrote, "I am not satisfied with the response and the repeated acts of theft. I want to go on record and voice my fear that the next incident may involve a personal assault. This was too close." Investigators have done a tremendous amount of work on this case, interviewing more than 1,000 people. At times, there have been suspects, but they've all been ruled out by DNA evidence found at the scene. Police also compared that evidence against the DNA of all of the male employees at the hospital who agreed to give it up.
And all of them were cooperative, except for a handful. And what they did was rub 2 swabs of cotton swabs inside their mouth and insert them into an envelope, which we sealed and forwarded to the lab.
And the ones that were not cooperative, so far, none of them have been developed as suspects?
No, not at all.
Detective Nelson says the case has been a roller coaster ride for 4.5 years, and over time, it's turned personal.
But there aren't many days that go by where I don't think about this case and wonder what we may be missing. Sherry Crandell wasn't doing anything wrong. She wasn't bothering anyone. She was just working in a hospital, and she ends up having her life taken away from her suddenly and viciously, and she was stolen from her kids. And we have to have someone pay for this. We need to bring someone to justice.
Justice for a family desperate for answers.
What do you miss about your mom now the most?
Just not being able to call her. Not being able to call her when something big happens in your life. I'll never have my mom at my wedding. My brothers never had my mom at their graduations. And you can never get that back. You know, I will miss her every day.
Friends and colleagues miss her too, and she's remembered at the hospital every day with this plaque, in a garden all her own. Paul Wagner, Fox 5 News.